I'm about to give you a crash course in what true natural birth looks like versus what happens when you introduce interventions. So if you want to know more, all you have to do is follow me on all of my social media channels, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And make sure you're also getting onto my e-newsletter that I send out every single week that will help you in having a natural birth, as natural as possible, not the one that leads you into falling into what I call the natural birth traps. If you go to my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com, and scroll down, you'll find that you have an option to put in your name and email to sign up for this newsletter. You're also going to get some free gifts from me, and they are going to help you to avoid the natural birth traps that are so prevalent in maternity care that you don't see coming, avoid the bait and switch, and avoid getting tricked out of having your beautiful natural birth so you're not robbed of your birth experience. You're also going to be able to know the exact steps that you need to take to get your birth plans back on track and to make sure that you actually have this beautiful transformative birth that you deserve. Because the truth is that birth is a physiological process. It is not a medical one. Okay, so are you ready to learn about how true physiological birth works? I'm about to blow your mind because this is a lot of things that moms don't know about. They talk about dilation and they talk about how they're not showing any signs of labor progress. And they wonder if maybe they just don't go into labor on their own. If this is you, if you're wondering, well, what if I don't dilate? What if I don't go into labor on my own? What if birth is super painful? Then let me just give you something that's going to make you have a big sigh of relief. First of all, the way that birth is being taught in the medical system and the way that it is perpetuated in our culture and the way that it's being treated in the hospitals is actually why birth is so painful. I discovered this firsthand because I've had 2 natural births. One was in the hospital, completely unmedicated, except for when I asked for the gas and air. And the other one was at home, where I was actually high on my own gas and air, because the fact is that when I took the gas and the air in the hospital, I was doing it because I wanted to escape the environment. If you've been following me for a while, then you know that I have these 5 pillars of empowered birth. You need the right mindset, the right education, the right environment, the right facilitators, and the right support. Today, I'm giving you the right education so that you can understand your physiological birth process. And if you really want to dive deep, this book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage, goes into great detail more about physiological birth and how it works. So if you really love to read, then I suggest Rachel Reed's book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage. It's one of my favorites. It's what I recommend to all of my clients. But here's the Cliff Notes version, okay? I wish that this had been around when I was pregnant with my first baby. I would have understood a lot more about what was going on with my own body. And I wish I'd also understood it with my second. But all I had at the time was Rachel Reed's blog, and she didn't go into as much detail as she does in this book. She didn't have everything that she has now. And I was just starting to learn about my physiological birth journey. So what is going on in those last few weeks of pregnancy before your baby is born? Because a lot of doctors, they say, oh, well, you're 37 weeks, you can start trying to induce. Here is why you do not want to force your baby out, even if you've passed 40 weeks before they are ready, unless there is a true, legitimate medical concern. Not that you're past your due date, not that you have a suspected big baby, not even that you have a suspected small baby. And if you just happen to have a chronic condition, but there are no actual complications, you don't even have to induce then. In fact, Jenny had high blood pressure. She had gestational diabetes. She was group B strep, and she'd had a previous C-section, and she still said no to induction. She knew that in her backup plan, the only thing that she was going to agree to was if her baby was absolutely not doing well and had to come out now, then she was going to just go for her planned gentle emergency C-section. That was her plan. If you can pay attention to how I describe physiological birth to you and how it works, you're going to automatically start to see and notice why birth isn't working. Here's how it works. In those last few weeks of pregnancy, your baby is still storing up fat that's going to help them stay warm on the outside. This may vary from baby to baby depending on what they need, depending on your own genetic makeup. You could grow a perfectly big, healthy baby and still be able to birth that baby easily. There are some moms who are tiny like me who have given birth to 10-pound babies with no problems. So before you start freaking out about a big baby, I'm just going to let you know with physiological birth, a big baby is not a problem. It is when you introduce intervention in birth that suddenly the big baby is the complication, because care providers tend to think, oh, well, I mean, big baby, we're going to have to do all the things to avoid shoulder dystocia, and they end up causing it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is the same thing if you are inducing for a small baby, that you are still growing and your baby just might need more time. Your baby is not going to follow every single other baby on the planet. You have your own unique genetic makeup. And when they say percentiles, it just means that they're measuring all of the other babies. They're saying out of all of these babies, you're on the low end or you're on the high end of this scale. It's a growth curve. It doesn't mean anything. As long as your baby is still growing, it's okay. I wish that somebody had told me that when they said that my son was in the 2nd percentile. Instead, I worried and thought that he was too small. And because I'm a small person, I also thought that maybe it was because I was malnourished in some way, because of the way that people said, well, you're tiny, so you can't give birth to a big baby, but you can't have a small baby because your baby's either malnourished or too big. Like, that was basically what I would have got. It was either going to be big baby or small baby. This is how it works. Ultrasounds are not effective. But your baby is putting on ounces at the end of pregnancy. They're putting on fat to keep them insulated. They're also building up their nervous system, which is going to allow them to have the reflexes that they need. They have certain reflexes. Newborns have the reflex of the step reflex and the rooting reflex are the two big ones. Both of these help with breastfeeding. Step reflex is going to be important, so keep paying attention, okay? The next thing, of course, is that their gut health is going to be extremely important. If they do not have their digestive system fully developed yet, then they're not going to be able to breastfeed effectively. They're going to have a lot of tummy problems. This is where colic comes in. This is where they end up having a lot of gas if they've been pushed out too early. Now, I'm not saying that this is a guarantee, because some babies, they come on their own and they're just gassy. Mine were. Maybe it was genetic or maybe not. But the fact is that if your baby has a lot of tummy issues and they were induced, or you had a C-section, then that could be part of it. This also leads to another one where they say that if you have a C-section, your baby's going to have trouble breathing. A lot of people are like, well, I had an induced labor and my baby had trouble breathing after birth. Guess what? In those last few weeks of pregnancy, the very, very last step is that your baby's lungs start to get ready to breathe oxygen on the outside. And a protein is produced called surfactant. This coats the lungs and gets them ready so that they can breathe in air and open up and inflate. Now, until that surfactant is produced, it does not matter how much evening primrose oil tablets you take. It does not matter how many membrane sweeps you do. It does not matter how much red raspberry leaf tea you drink. It doesn't matter how much sex you have. It doesn't matter if you do acupuncture, acupressure. It doesn't matter. You're tiring yourself out at the end of your pregnancy, and baby is just not ready. This does not mean that your body is broken and defective and that you're never going to go into labor. It just means your baby has not produced that surfactant yet. What the surfactant does is that it triggers the uterus to be irritated. And the uterus then goes, oh, it's time for labor to start, and starts contracting. This also signals to your brain to start producing hormones. Starts to also give you that feeling of, okay, things might be starting within a day or two. Now, this is not the time to go out and do all of the things. For more on that, you want to check out some of my other videos about why you don't want to do all of the things and you want to really rest at the end of your pregnancy. I tell all of my clients when they're getting close to the end to just rest as much as they can. And this is what I did with my own pregnancy. I was having a lot of practice contractions. This is another thing your uterus will do. is it's going to warm up. It may start warming up before your baby is actually ready to come. This allows it to have a nice strong muscle, because the uterus is not an organ, it's a muscle. It is a muscle that needs to build up enough strength to be able to push your baby out. Now, again, this does not have anything to do with dilation. So you could have a whole bunch of practice contractions, but your cervix is still tight and closed. This does not mean that your body is not working properly. This means your uterus is just practicing. If you have a lot of practice contractions and it's cramping, but you're not dilating, you're not going into labor yet, you can also drink a lot of water, and that could also signal it, like if you're dehydrated, then those contractions are going to hurt more. But if you are hydrated and you're taking care of yourself, and sometimes if you're doing too much, your body is also going to signal. The reason it does that is evolutionary. Think about it. If you're out there and there's a tiger in the area, or you're away from your cave and labor is going to start within a week or two, your body is saying, hey, you're doing too much. We need to really gear up to nest down, and you need to be out of this forest and into this cave. You can't be out here where there's a tiger because it's not helpful. So we're going to signal to you to go into your cave. If you continue to ignore that, your body is going to send stronger signals, because it's like it's got to get your attention to get you to rest. It can tell by your heart rate that you're not resting. If you're doing the walking and trying to get yourself into labor, your body is saying, hey, the contractions are starting to try to get you to go and rest, not to keep pressing it. So you keep pressing it because this is what you've been taught. And this is why you think that you're in labor for days and days and days and nothing's happening. And then you give in and have membrane sweeps and you induce. Again, this is not what you want to do. Okay, so we've talked about the fact that there's early labor and prodromal labor. Basically, your body is signaling you to get into your cave, okay? You need to be resting at this time. You cannot be doing all of the things. The next thing about physiological birth that you really need to understand is this. If you introduce interventions or interruptions, the physiological process gets delayed. This is why I really, really hate those contraction timing apps. Because if you're doing that, you're inside of your thinking brain. You're not in your mammalian meditative brain. When you go into labor, your body is signaling for you to go rest and get into a meditative state. This allows oxytocin to flow, which signals the contractions to keep going and to keep pressing on and to start, and they will rise and they will fall away. And your cervix will start to open. However, if you are being asked a bunch of questions or people are putting a lot of fear onto you, this is when labor hurts, because you're not able to get into your meditative state and you don't have those endorphins flowing. It's like when you're having sex. It can be really, really painful if somebody's just pumping away and you don't have that buildup. Like, think about it. If you're not lubricated, if you're not in that mood, sex doesn't feel so great for you. Now, think about when you are in that zone, when you are deeply, deeply connected to your body and you're connected with your emotions, and how amazing that orgasm is. Because, I mean, you can try to get an orgasm and just do all of the things, and maybe it will be like almost like just a quick sneeze and it's like, oh, that was it. But then you can also have that expansive body consuming orgasm. That takes the right environment. It takes the right person around you for trust. If you're not going to want to have sex in front of somebody, definitely don't invite them to your birth. This is the mentality here. A watched pot does not boil. If you're being watched trying to have an orgasm, it's not going to work. Sex is not going to be as enjoyable with an audience unless you're into that kind of thing. But the fact is like, this is what your body needs, is that you're going to have these endorphins that come in and make it so you don't actually feel any pain. This is how it's possible to have a painless birth, even an orgasmic birth. A lot of people are like, well, how is that possible? I don't think every woman can do it. Actually, yes, we can. It's just that we've been trained not to. And I saw this firsthand with my 2 birth experiences. In the hospital, I kept trying to get into that meditative state. And every 5 minutes, a nurse would try to pester me because I was still in triage and they couldn't get me a bed right away. So I was not able to focus because there were also other women around me in the other curtained off rooms that were making noises. I couldn't get into my meditative state. I tried again when I got into the tub. The water helped a little, but I just couldn't get there. It was just not comfortable. And I asked for the gas and air because I needed to get into that meditative state. As soon as I was able to float away from my body, basically, and to forget that everybody else was there, I was able to relax, and labor just, I didn't feel anything. It was just surges that would ebb and flow, but I wouldn't feel any pain. So this is what you can do in a completely physiological birth, is you get into that meditative state either through hypnobirthing or just by following your body's instincts, because your body will do this naturally. You can do this even without any training whatsoever, just taking the deep breaths in and then letting them out. If you've already done yoga breathing, you already know how to do this. If you've already done any exercises and you've noticed how endorphins start to flow when you start to push past a certain point, then you already know how to do this. This is instinctual, okay? Like, this is instinctual. You do not need to take everything that you can possibly think of. You don't have to be Superwoman to be able to do this. So the next thing about oxytocin is it's a very shy hormone. So if somebody interrupts you, suddenly you're back in pain again. This is again why you want to have the right environment where nobody touches you. Because when you go into that deep meditative state on your own, you can easily be snapped out of it by people doing things that you don't want them to be doing. This is again why I say you need to understand physiological birth. That's one of the 5 pillars. Because once you understand it, then you know how to pick the right environment and the right care provider and communicate to your partner and your doula and everybody around you what you need to feel safe enough to basically leave your body. Because this is what you do, is you leave your body. Now, at a certain point though, things shift from the progressing labor of active labor, where you're moving around and you're in your zone and your element and you're just following the rhythms of your body, not letting anybody else tell you what position to get into, not letting anybody else speed things up, because once they try to speed things up and get you to do things, again, you're out of your body. This can also lead to labor taking longer than it needs to, because you can't relax. This is what happened to me, is I was in labor with my daughter, but I called the midwife because I thought, oh, I'm 4 centimeters, so I should call the midwife, brought her to the house, had the doula there, and they had me getting up and down the stairs and doing all of the things to try to get labor moving. It's counterintuitive, but you don't want to do that. If you feel sleepy, take a nap. If you're tired between contractions and you don't want to do the exercises, that's your body saying, you know what? No, like, we're just going to rest. If you need to rest, rest. If you're hungry, eat, because that is early labor. Get in your cave. We'll pick things up. And if it starts up and fizzles out a few times, that's okay. You don't have to do anything until you feel in your instincts that something's wrong, not other people telling you that something is wrong. Because oftentimes when you follow the physiological birth process, unless you have had a complication yourself, or there's something wrong with your baby where your body is like, something's wrong, which you will know, birth works. This is why there's a much lower risk of complications with moms who intentionally choose unassisted birth or intentionally choose home birth. But a lot of stories, like a lot of research, lumps in intended unassisted and home births with unintended unassisted home births. And in that case, when you're not prepared for it, that's when problems arise, because nobody knows what to do. So if you are going to go that route where you want to have nobody touching you, even in the hospital, you need to understand how this works. Okay, so the next part though is transition. Everybody says transition is the worst. I'm going to tell you that yes, it is. This is the part where Jenny questioned her existence. This is the part that I said, I don't want to do this for 8 hours. This is the part that said, I'm done. I just want to stop this. This is the part that had Rebecca also not wanting to do this anymore. She was like, I can't even. But then the contraction would ebb away because she had had 2 previous C-sections. She had a longer transition, but it was more spaced out. So she would have these really hard contractions. And I could tell which ones when her cervix was opening and which ones when she was bearing down. So that was how her uterus was able to work with the scar. With Jenny's, hers was fast. It was like, transition is just going to be fast and it's going to be hard and you're going to go to the hospital and then in an hour you're going to have your baby. Mine is 2 minutes. Mine is 2 minutes. I don't want to do this. This sucks. Feeling a lot of pressure. And then the water's released and the head comes down and baby's out. Why does this happen? Why does it suddenly go from being, I can manage this, this is easy, to I don't want to do this anymore, it's hard? There's also an evolutionary reason for that too. It's called adrenaline, okay? So the reason why transition is the hardest part is because your body needs you to wake up. It is intentionally trying to get you to wake up. Can't do that if you're in the oxytocin, endorphin high. Remember, you're high. But a baby is now coming and you need to be able to be alert to care for that baby. You can't stay in that trance. This is another reason why there was such a problem when moms started getting drugged up on scopolamine and Demerol and they were not alert for their baby. And I will tell you more about that in a minute. So you're in this high, suddenly things get really intense. Your body is waking up. It's starting to get more painful. You don't want to do this anymore. There's a lot of pressure. You're like, I can't do this anymore. It's your body saying, hey, we're going to flood you with adrenaline to wake you up. This is the shortest stage. It could be only a few minutes. A lot of moms, they say, oh, I want the drugs. I can't do this without the drugs. Unfortunately, you're going to find out that when you introduce the drugs, this causes a problem, especially if you're going through transition. Now, once you've woken up, your cervix is starting to dilate the last few centimeters. Your uterus is now building up that muscle. There's an actual fundal muscle that will push down to get your baby out. There's also going to be a signal for you to start pushing. Now, a lot of care providers that say, don't push until we can tell that you're 10 centimeters. This is a problem. Now, this is also based on their old medical model when they were messing with birth. You're going to see, as you understand physiological birth, that a lot of the interventions are the reason why more interventions happen once you follow this and understand it and see what's really going on with your body. So your body is gearing up and it's pulling up those muscles. And as it pulls up the uterine muscle, that is what dilates your cervix. Your cervix is not a hole that just suddenly gets bigger. It is a whole muscle that is pulling things up, almost like when you're pulling up a sock and trying to get it so you can fit your foot through, and how you're opening that quickly and getting it all bunched up. Well, that's what happens. So your body is signaling for you to maybe bear down a little, maybe just through the end of this contraction, you feel a little pushy. It's okay. That's what your body is designed to do. You start to do that. This is different from when you are doing this when you are in the hospital with an epidural, because in that case, you don't know what your body's actually trying to do because it's not, your body is not being in charge here. Your body is hijacked by these drugs. It's the same thing with Pitocin. If you feel pushy with Pitocin, that's because it's hyperstimulating your uterus and it may not actually be time to push. And this is when you have the problem of your cervix getting swollen because it's not actually time. Baby wasn't able to maneuver into the right position. Pitocin has just basically taken the engine and just ramped things up without actually knowing the direction. All right, so your baby starts to come down. You can start to feel a little bit more pushy. Your uterus is starting to push your baby down even more. And you might even feel like it's almost like reverse vomiting. You can't stop it. It's just happening. You don't actually have to push. So you're just there taking in the deep breaths and your body will start to push down and it will also signal you, hey, we've got to not push during this contraction. Otherwise we're going to tear. You might even instinctually feel like you need to close your legs a little bit. That's okay. because that's also your body telling you what you need to do and what position you need to get into. This is why a lot of hands and knees positions can help. Or sometimes your body is like, nope, we have to be upright for this to work. And unfortunately, the medical system, again, has this backwards view that you need to have your legs wide open. This actually can narrow your pelvic outlet and make it harder for your baby to get out. But if you have your knees inward and then your legs outward, this actually widens your pelvic outlet. So you could actually, in theory, be on your hands and knees, have your knees pushing inward and have your legs out and squat down and be able to birth your baby more effectively that way than if you were flat on your back with your legs up in the air, which is what most doctors prefer for the position. Midwives will do it in every position. They will make sure that they can catch your baby. But doctors, they are taught one way because the medical system, really in their medical training, they have a doll that's on its back and a baby is being pushed out of that doll, either mechanically or somebody else is pushing on the stomach to push the baby out for them to practice catching. And believe me, this is not the way that evolution is designed us to give birth. Unfortunately, this is what we see in our birth culture, so it's just perpetuated, and you think that that's the way it has to be, and then this is what leads to more tearing and more babies getting stuck and labor being harder than it needs to be and pushing being harder than it needs to be. Okay, so you've now pushed your baby out, your body is stretching, it's signaling when you don't want to push, and then slowly, after the head is born, there's going to be a rotation of the shoulders. Now, oftentimes, care providers can get very handsy, which is why I say if you want a true natural birth, you need a care provider willing to sit on their hands. Because if they pull that baby, as they did with my son, that's when it's traumatic. Because yes, the baby's out in 2 pushes. Sure, awesome, yay. However, you've also increased the amount of tearing that happens. There's more damage. Baby hasn't had the chance to rotate. Baby's now in shock. But if baby is still alert because you didn't have any drugs in your system, here's what happens next. Baby gets up onto your chest. They lay down on your tummy, and then they slowly crawl their way up to the breast and latch on themselves. This is why the step reflex is really important, and the rooting reflex. They need to have those reflexes. They need to be alert. When babies are groggy, they do not have, or they've been taken too early, they do not have those reflexes yet. So breastfeeding is going to be harder. Your baby naturally will be doing the step reflex, massaging your belly. And then this will signal to your uterus, hey, baby's out. And it also helps massage the uterus to get the placenta to deliver the last bit of blood volume to your baby. This is why delayed cord clamping, you don't want that. You want optimal cord clamping, which means you want to wait for white. You want that cord to be limp and white. Here is why you do not want anybody clamping that cord with your baby, because your baby has 1/3 of their blood volume inside that placenta. In fact, this is also why a lot of care providers started saying, oh, there's going to be brain bleeds if we don't do vitamin K. There's going to be jaundice if we don't do this. Like babies who are breastfed get jaundice, so we need to just do other things. Because doctors back in the 1920s, you have to remember, moms went into the hospital, they were drugged up on scopolamine and Demerol. Their babies were pulled out with forceps, and not only that, but those babies were really drugged and groggy. These babies were then taken away to a nursery, and mom was taken to a recovery room. Mom was unconscious. Baby was unconscious. Nobody was breastfeeding for 12 hours. In that time, they lost the golden hour, and mom started to bleed out because the baby was not alert. Mom was not alert, so the baby was not able to do the reflexes on the stomach and massage that placenta out. So cords were clamped quickly. All that blood volume was lost from the baby. Not only that, but in addition to this, they cut an episiotomy. So the perineum was not able to squeeze the mucus out of the baby's lungs, which resulted in suctioning, which means that even babies that were alert and ready to breastfeed, once they stop drugging mothers up, if they're still doing the routine suctioning, babies now had a very traumatic experience with their throat. Do you think they want to put a nipple in their mouth? No, they do not. They're in pain. So then you go into this whole thing of moms are bleeding out. We need to make sure that every mom has this managed third stage and make sure that the placenta comes out at a certain point. We can't wait for the cord to be white. It's dangerous. When in truth, it's all of these interventions that are happening that is actually the problem. So baby massages on your stomach. Your placenta transfers the last of the blood volume to your baby. So your baby has all their iron stores until they start having their needs to have more foods. And once they have that and they don't have that iron deficiency, what happens is, of course, they go on to solid food and it's not a problem. But again, if you take away the baby's blood volume as what's happening, they're like, oh, well, you need to give the baby iron supplements and all of this stuff because otherwise they don't have it. No, that's not actually what's happening. Breast milk is the best food for your baby. Your colostrum is the best food for your newborn baby in the first few days. That's all they really need. However, you need to also be feeding on demand. I can get into a whole other thing on breastfeeding alone, but I'm just going to keep this short for now. So after the placenta has finished transferring, that is when it detaches. Now, this could take 10 minutes. This could take half an hour. This could take an hour. This could take an hour and a half. Usually, if it's taken an hour and a half, it's still fine. And this happens at a home birth. And then after that, your bleeding stops because your baby is also massaging your uterus at the same time with their little feet. And your uterus is starting to be like, okay, it's time to detach this placenta. As it detaches the placenta and your uterus is contracted and stimulated by you breastfeeding, then your uterus will naturally start to shrink down so that wound is not so bad inside of you. The more you breastfeed on demand, the faster that those contractions will be able to bring your uterus down, with your baby also doing the nice, gentle fundal massage so that your uterus is not boggy. Because again, this is another thing, if you take the placenta out too fast and then you're doing the fundal massage to fix the problem that you caused by taking the placenta out. Finally, here's the last part, that once that placenta has detached and it's sitting in your birth canal, and that is the point where your bleeding has stopped, placenta might not be out, you could probably be safe to just pull the cord at that point. One of my mentors and childbirth educators, who is very wise and has attended hundreds of births and understands physiological birth, she told me when I was helping my client, Rebecca actually had this. We were wondering what was going on because the placenta hadn't come out yet, but she had no bleeding. And so my mentor, she said to me when I got on the phone with her, all right, just have dad wrap the cloth around the cord and just gently tug because it's safe to do this now. It's literally sitting in the birth canal. It's sitting in her vagina and she just can't feel it because she's just had a baby and everything's numb right now. This is another one of nature's designs. It stretches you out, but you're numb. You don't feel as much. And this is another thing why recovery from a physiological birth is so much easier than a recovery from a unmedicated birth in the hospital where you've had interventions. So you just, at that point, it's okay to pull the cord, but you do not want to do cord traction just to get the placenta out faster, just because of an impatient doctor. Again, you want a doctor who can sit on their hands. This is why you also say, do not touch me. Remember, if they touch you without your permission, that is assault and battery. They don't want you to know that, or they're not aware that you know that. So if you say, do not touch me after birth, I would prefer to have that placenta come out on its own. I don't care how long it takes. If some bleeding happens, I've got some tinctures or I have a plan in place for that before we introduce drugs, then that's what you can do. You basically have your backup plan for your backup plan for your backup plan. This is why I say you need to create your birth plan at the beginning of pregnancy. You need to have the 5 pillars of empowerment. So you need to have the right mindset. You need to have the right education, which I just gave you today on physiological birth. You need to have the right environment. You need to have the right facilitators, and you need to have the right support. When you have all 5 of these optimized, that's when birth works. So this allows you to then have a nice breastfeeding experience with your baby, and you don't have any problems. Maybe you might have 1 or 2 if your baby has a shallow latch, but it's not because you're not making milk. It's because your baby might have a tongue tie. However, this can even be rectified, and you want to go to a specialist for that. Ultimately, though, your baby's going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You're not going to have any complications with a physiological birth. Now, the benefits of induction. Unless you're having a major complication, like you're in danger of preeclampsia right now, or HELLP syndrome, or cholestasis, or something else that's basically keeping baby in is more dangerous than getting baby out, there are no benefits to induction, because induction hijacks that entire physiological process that I just described to you. There is no biofeedback from your baby to your uterus to your brain saying, hey, this contraction needs to be a lot easier to help me to turn, to navigate the pelvis. There is no biofeedback saying, hey, this is too strong. Mom's not able to cope. She's not able to rest. She needs to be able to rest in order to keep going for how long we need to keep going. There's none of that. There is no biofeedback saying, hey, let's flood the system with more endorphins so that mom gets into her labor trance and is able to tolerate this because she won't feel any pain. There is none of that. This is why when you introduce Pitocin, you break the waters, you do a membrane sweep, you do multiple cervical checks, you continue to interrupt the laboring mother, like you continue to get interrupted by your birth team, and they keep trying to do things to you. When you keep doing that and you keep getting interrupted, that's when birth hurts, because you can't get into your labor state. That is why I ended up having to ask for the gas and air so I could escape. That was it. That was the only reason I did it. When I had a home birth, I sent everybody away and I was laboring on my own, and there was no pain. I was able to open up my mouth wide. I was able to do deep vocalization as my body was telling me to do. I was following my instincts and how I moved. I was following my instincts on when to bear down and when to pull back. And birth was really easy for me. Whereas beforehand, there was a lot of fear. When you have fear in your birth, this is when it's flooding to your system and saying, hey, there's a tiger in the area. And Pitocin hijacks that whole thing. Breaking your waters makes it so that your baby is now coming before they're ready. They're not in a good position. Oftentimes, if your baby wasn't ready and it doesn't signal contractions, the next step is that they give Pitocin. Pitocin, as I said, hijacks the system. The other thing that hijacks the system is the epidural. The epidural now is taking away your ability to have those endorphins. So if the epidural wears off, guess what? You have no endorphins at all. The epidural has worn off, and now birth is super painful because you haven't had that buildup like you needed with all of those endorphins. They were blocked off. Not only that, the epidural is not a cure-all. It comes with complications. It can slow your labor, which then leads to Pitocin, which then leads to more problems. And then your baby is in distress and you get a C-section. Or they cut an episiotomy to get that baby out faster. Or they pull that baby out with forceps and vacuum. This is a problem when you introduce any intervention into a physiological birth. You are no longer having a physiological birth. Your baby may not be able to do those reflexes, especially if they've been induced and they weren't ready to be able to massage your uterus, which means that you have more complications of possibility of bleeding more. More hemorrhaging can happen when you introduce Pitocin, because again, that's not your body's hormones. It does not cross the blood-brain barrier. So when you introduce Pitocin, there is more chance of hemorrhaging. The other thing, of course, is that if you pull on the cord and clamp that cord before the whole blood volume has happened, baby is not getting enough blood volume, they can have problems later on leading to jaundice, or they have the brain bleeds because they've had a traumatic birth going through the birth canal, and they weren't able to have that natural ability to heal because you messed with it. When you mess with birth, you mess with an entire ecosystem for birth. It's like if you go out and you kill some bug that you thought was just an annoyance, and you take this poison and you spray it all over the lawn. Well, guess what? This is now why we have a problem with our bees. And because if you keep doing this, if you keep messing with the system, that's when nature's like, what are you doing? Now we have another complication. Now you screwed this whole thing up. And I know that's not what you want. I know that you want a natural birth as natural as possible. And I know that you're getting a whole bunch of information from people that are saying that you should just give in and get the epidural, or that you need to induce because it's scary and birth doesn't work if you don't induce, and that you're going to have complications if you don't induce. Like, there's a lot of fear in the medical system. And it comes from the fact that at one point, some man, some doctor, thought birth could be very profitable. And then they started inventing drugs or discovering drugs that would make it more efficient and more profitable. And then all of that knowledge was lost or pushed underground, because you have to remember another thing. We were literal property. We didn't have rights. As women, us speaking out about, hey, you're messing with a physiological process, all they had to do was say one word, witch, and then you're in trouble. So they had all of this problem with treating women like defective machines that needed to become more efficient, pushing the midwives out, calling us witches, making it so that we're afraid to speak up, all that wisdom lost. And then pushing birth into the hospital where it's even more controlled, and then doing things to you that continue to lead down the cascade of interventions. And it's even just the smallest thing of leaving your home that can do it, which is again why you need the 5 pillars of empowerment, which are the right mindset, the right education, the right environment, the right facilitators, and the right support. And you need all 5 of these optimized in order to get your true natural birth. So again, if you want to know more about how to get a true natural birth and these 5 pillars that I keep talking about, and you want to be able to avoid getting into one of those natural birth traps that I also mentioned, then I'm just going to invite you to sign up for my newsletter on my website. Go to empoweringmomsbirth.com. You'll get a free gift from me. This will help you to avoid those natural birth traps. You'll understand more about physiological birth. You'll get those 5 pillars. You'll learn how to work with them and to optimize them, so that you don't get tricked by the system. You don't have to fight. You don't have to beg. You don't have to compromise. You don't have to give up. You don't have to give in. You're not going to crumble under the pressure. No leaving your dignity at the door. And ultimately, here's the best part. You won't be robbed of the true natural birth experience that you deserve to have, the one that nature intended you to have. Because the secret about physiological birth that most people don't know about until they experience it themselves is that when you go through it and you truly experience the power in your own body, this is when you transform into a higher version of yourself. You transform your motherhood. You become the expert in your child. You become so connected to your baby, to your family, to what you need to do in life, your purpose, your true reason for being here. You start to see it. You recognize that you can have more. You can have more for yourself and for your children. And this also allows you to evolve to the next level. Because when you notice about nature is that we're always optimizing for the highest level of evolution, correct? So you want your children to be able to grow up and thrive and to be able to pass on their genetic material to continue that line. And in order to do that, you cannot be traumatized by your birth, because when we're traumatized by our birth, when we are lowering our expectations, when we don't get that cascade of hormones, that's when we start to think that we're failing. that's when we start to defer to other people and let them tell us that we're doing it wrong and that we feel like we're a bad mother and we feel like our bodies have failed us and that our bodies are broken and defective. And it lowers our self-esteem. It affects our marriages. You don't want to have sex if you don't feel like your body is working. You don't want to have that conversation with your partner if you feel like you can't speak up. You don't want to even go to the doctor for your kids because you know that they're just going to keep telling you that you're not doing it right and that you need to put that baby on formula when really what you need is true support for breastfeeding and you're not getting it. Same thing for sleep. There's so many parenting experts out there telling you that you're wrong when your instincts are telling you something else. And you're like, there's something else going on. Like, no. I've had 10 years of experience, 20 years of experience. I'm telling you that it's this. And the fact is that when you go through a true physiological birth, which is also what I call the empowered birth, but it doesn't even have to be physiological because the true empowered birth is taking control of your birth experience and having the choice, not having the choice made for you. So if you feel that there's something wrong, absolutely, you call in the medical assistance. But you don't need to be treated like you're a disaster waiting to happen. That's the true empowerment. Once you have that, once you have the 5 pillars, once you know how they all work, then that is when birth works. That's when your life works. That's when your family works. That's when you know when to call in experts and when to just let their advice slide because it's not what's working for you. And nobody can ever take your power away from you again. So again, all you have to do to learn more about these 5 pillars is go to my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com, put your name and email in, sign up for the weekly newsletter. You're going to get a free gift from me. It varies from time to time, but typically all of these are designed to help you to have a true natural birth, to recognize your own power in your body, to also be able to spot any traps in the medical system. I don't send anything that's not going to be of complete value to you. I always send a weekly newsletter that will make sure that you can actually get the information that was not being taught when I was going through my pregnancies, that I had to find, that I had to dig, I had to really pull back the layers. And it's taken me years to get it all and then to test out my theories. And as I said, you can get the birth you want without having to fight, beg, or compromise. You can be like Jenny, who was 41, gestational diabetes, Group B strep positive, told that she was too high risk to have a VBAC, and she ended up having an unassisted hospital birth after cesarean. And like she just did it. She just proved the system wrong. When they said that she was too high risk and wouldn't be able to do it, she proved them wrong using this model. And I've proved the system wrong with my own births as well by using this model. And this model is so powerful. So I really, really love to serve you more. And if you loved this video on physiological birth, I invite you to share it everywhere because this is the true model of physiological birth. It's based off of what I read inside Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage and what I've learned and discovered in the 10 years that I've been in the birth community as a doula, childbirth educator, advocate, and as a mom who experienced 2 physiological births, one at home, one in the hospital, and helped mothers do the same, including mothers who've had previous C-sections and were told that their bodies were broken and defective and would never go into labor on their own, and that they would never be able to have a physiological birth, that it would have to be a highly controlled medicalized one to be able to do this. All right. So again, empoweringmomsbirth.com, and I will see you next week. Bye.